Okay, let me start by saying that I'm not going to be discussing race in this video at all. Peter Covington identifies as a National Socialist. I don't. In fact, I think National Socialism is kind of a stupid ideology. But critiquing a Nazi for being a Nazi would take like a series of videos, a couple of hours long each, so we're not even going to touch that. What I'm going to talk about here is homosexuality. Now, Harold Covington, he's the big boss of the Northwest migration movement. He runs the Radio Free Northwest podcast, which is this whole white nationalist neo-Nazi thing about how white people need to move to the Northwest. And even though I'm not a Nazi, I've been listening to it because, well, I'm into alternative right politics, and I figure there are useful things I can get out of it if I can pick out the Nazi stuff. Sort of like reading Snorri Sturluson and picking out the Christian stuff. And I've grown kind of worried about where America's going and what's going to happen to Western civilization in the next few decades. And I've kind of gotten it in my head that maybe I could move to the Northwest and ride my white privilege all the way to the top, even though I'm not a Nazi. Problem with that, though, is that Harold Covington is vehemently homophobic. And in almost every episode of this podcast, he talks about how, we have to stop the bugger boys from polluting our society. And in at least one episode, he says that homosexuality is a mental disorder, and that deviant sexualities are actually mental disorders, and that in his Northwest Republic, people with deviant sexualities would be institutionalized and, if possible, treated. And really, I think this is very silly. I would expect nothing less from a Nazi, but I'm going to talk about this in particular. I'm not entirely sure why. I just felt like doing the video. But it sounds to me like nothing but a lot of just old school white conservative good old boy baggage that it's kind of old hat that if you believe homosexuality is genetic, but you believe that criminality is environmental, then you're probably a stupid liberal. But it looks to me like it goes both ways. If you understand that criminality is genetic, yet you insist that homosexuality is some kind of mental disorder, then you're probably one of those old school conservatives. It's simply not true. Science tells us that homosexuality, and in fact sexuality in general, is genetic. And I know a lot of Nazis are probably going to talk about how science is run by the Jews or something like that, but even if that was true, it's all we got. And once you start arguing with science, you really no longer have any ground to stand on. To quote Fringe Elements, I am sexually attracted to white men and to a lesser extent white women. And in this theoretical Nazi republic, I would be considered an enemy of the state and put in some kind of mental institution. Even though deviant sexual behavior is generally genetic. It is not caused by environment, it is not purely behavioral. This is what science tells us. And while I am fully in favor that rapists and kitty fiddlers and those sexual deviants who threaten the stability of society and hurt other people, they ought to be put in jail at the very least, preferably either executed or sent to Uzbekistan. However, deviant sexualities such as homosexuality, bisexuality, transgenderism, S&M, or a grown man putting on a pretty dress, they hurt no one, and they pose no threat whatsoever to the stability of society. Yes, homosexuals produce no children. But they are a very, very, very tiny percentage of your population. Now, it's well known that the idea that 10% of people are homosexual is bullshit. I'd guess that it's more like 1%, and 1% of your population is going to be sterile for all kinds of reasons. And in any event, to say that people who aren't producing new babbies to be good little workers and soldiers for the state is just a ridiculous totalitarian statement. Though there I go again critiquing a Nazi for being a Nazi. So, they are entirely too small a percentage of the population for their sterility to affect birth rates in the gene pool. And, as is well known, everything that the mainstream Republicans in America say about homosexuals threatening marriage and the family is demonstrably bullshit. So, given all of this, your proposed state-mandated homophobia goes against all logic. And let's see, Mr. Covington has also said that we need to stop homosexuals because they spread disease. That is also not true. I mean, man-on-man poopy butt sex has no more risk of spreading a sexually transmitted disease than sex between a man and a woman. And if you're talking about AIDS in particular, AIDS made the jump from apes to humans because of vaccines, and then later made the jump into the straight population, or no, in fact, not just the straight population, but the regular population in general, not because of homosexuals, but because of intravenous drug users. So that too is bullshit. And really, I have nothing else to say on the subject. That's really all I wanted to say. Where's too hot?